Welcome back to Vantage. Now, Vietnam has been a focus for us. You would have seen our thematics on this subject. Our very own Miloš Pap was recently quoted in the Investors Chronicle in terms of how to get exposure to the country. I am delighted to welcome back an old friend to the Vantage cameras. Craig Martin, welcome back to Vantage.
It's a real pleasure to be back here, Neil.
Now, you have recently celebrated Vietnam Holdings' 20th anniversary. I'd love to understand how you'd summarize the company's achievements since its inception.
Well, I think it's just keeping up with the tremendous trajectory of Vietnam itself.
Yeah.
Right? If you look back over 20 years, how the economy has grown so rapidly by multiples. I'd say the one thing that's really interesting is how the domestic consumer has changed. And as an investor, that's really exciting as well. And the rise in domestic consumerism, it's really like a rocket that fires in different stages. Back in maybe 20 years ago, per capita GDP was between $1,000 and maybe $2,000 per head. Mm-hmm. And you started to see people consuming brands and spending more money. Now that per capita GDP is north of $5,000. And so there's another consumer spend surge, and that's seeing tremendous opportunities around modern trade and the penetration of modern trade. And then who knows, in the next 10 years, when the final phases of that rocket trajectory take off. So I think the last 20 years has been keeping up and catching up with Vietnam's fundamental growth. It hasn't always been a smooth trajectory. So you've got to be nimble, you've got to be active, you've got to be focused and really know what you want to be looking at. So at the end of the day, we're stock pickers. The economy has changed and grown rapidly. The opportunities have got more wide in terms of the opportunity set, but you mustn't get carried away. You've got to stick to discipline and be an active, responsible investor and not get too carried away.
Okay, well, firstly, congratulations on hitting the mark. 20 years is significant. And within that last answer was a hint that the journey is not done, right?
Yes. No, that's true. That's
true. So, I mean, I'd like to focus actually on the Vietnamese government and the sort of capitalist mindset that they have and their drive towards sort of domestic reforms illustrated by the new agenda. A lot of people are comparing it to the sort of previous reforms, the Doi Moi reforms of the 1980s, which opened up the country to more global trade.
Yes.
What are the new reforms and, what hope do they give you?
Well, they're very far-reaching. Mm-hmm. And the reforms are really being led by the leadership, by To Lam. You could look at them as 4 pillars. The first pillar would be around science, technology, digital transformation. And that's probably underpinned by the push on education, STEM, science, technology, engineering, maths, and the acceleration of infrastructure for a digital economy. So that's the first pillar. The second pillar is around international integration and international inclusion. You mentioned trade. Well, of course, that's one dimension of that. Vietnam's got a very open trade policy. Yeah. The Made in Vietnam story, trading with everyone. But also there's a softer side to that, which is around bamboo diplomacy and being very active, negotiating Vietnam's position within ASEAN, but then within the world. Do you balance US versus China? It's a difficult path, but that's the second pillar. I would say the third pillar is around judicial and legal reform. That's to make the system more efficient, remove some of the red tape, the bureaucracy. It's not done yet, and sometimes that comes with some unintended consequences. You have to kind of cut some wood to make sure that the tree grows properly.
Yeah.
And I would say the last one is probably the most important, which is the focus on the private sector. Now, this really got the local stock market excited last year. This is kind of resolutions to enhance the role of the private sector and push the economy really forward into a more modernized phase. And so the local stock market got really, really super excited around that. So I'd say that private sector drive, not ignoring the state-owned enterprises and the companies that aren't in that private sector pool, but enabling, your phrase was capitalist, enabling a capitalist system to evolve and operate in a fairly small c conservative, single party kind of stable political environment. So it's a great opportunity. It's with challenges,
Yeah.
but the government's committed because they want to see by 2045 Vietnam be a very modern, high-income, developed economy. So they've got a very long, ambitious plan, and it's reform-led.
Okay. And look, I mean, this success has led to actually an emergence of the market. So FTSE Russell recently confirmed Vietnam being upgraded to a sort of secondary emerging market status. I'd love to understand what the impact of that has been so far in terms of capital flows, and are there similar prospects for an upgrade from MSCI? And ultimately, there's this potential upgrade of Vietnam's sort of sovereign credit rating to investment grade status. How's that going to impact the way you're thinking about it, and what do you think that's going to do in terms of capital flows into Vietnam?
Well, these are all good road markers on that journey.
Yeah.
So the FTSE Russell upgrade, which, as you say, kicks in September this year, has been 7 years in the making. So it's not overnight. So the reforms and the process to modernize stock market infrastructure, satisfy the requirements of the stakeholders of FTSE Russell have been important. So those improvements have made for a better operating environment for investors. We've seen a little bit of excitement from the domestic market ahead of that, but we haven't seen the flows from the foreign investors. That will take time. In fact, to be fair, across the whole of Southeast Asia, there's been a lot of outflow into either, say, Taiwan for TSMC, or into Korea, or back to the US. So it's been a soft period generally for emerging markets. But now Vietnam is going to be positioned as a secondary emerging market rather than a frontier market. I think MSCI is still a few years away. Yeah. But I think what is more important is what you also alluded to, is the upgrade in the sovereign rating. So Vietnam's debt is about one notch below sovereign quality, below investment grade rather. Yeah. And where that's really important is the country has an ambitious plan for investing in infrastructure, particularly in power and power generation. It's all about electrons, right? Today it's electrons to tokens. So you need the electrons, you need the energy. That's a huge amount of capex, which today the bond market is not able to finance. So if Vietnam can get upgraded on the debt side, I think that opens up a whole new avenue to co-finance these projects, yes, with some equity, and you've got an emerging market, capital markets, the most liquid in Southeast Asia on a daily basis. Yeah. And then you've got an improved debt market. And those two are very powerful tools to help finance that much needed infrastructure spend to keep this modernization trend going.
Okay. And look, I mean, the economy is one which I would characterize as it's been resilient. It's managed to sort of navigate some challenges. How the most recent sort of shock being, the crisis in the Middle East, how's the economy dealing with the impact of supply chain constraints from energy and other materials?
Well, I think resilience is the key. And so actually it's done remarkably well considering those headwinds. And that's partly because Vietnam has a lot of its own energy. Yeah. Doesn't have everything. It has to import about $5 billion a year of crude. But it produces its own fertilizer from its own gas sources. That's very important. And it's got an increasing mix of renewable energy in addition to hydro. Yeah. So that's well positioned. And so it's been resilient against what's been happening in the Middle East. But I think we need to be realistic. The longer the war goes on, I think there's a danger, isn't there, of higher inflation getting baked into many economies. Yeah. And so that's something we're keeping a very close eye on. Obviously, we'd like the war to end sooner than later. But Vietnam's been much better placed than many of its peers within the rest of Asia.
Okay. So now let's try and bring it all together. We've talked about domestic reform, the growth of the consumer, the upgrade effectively potentially of the sovereign rating, the resilience to energy supply shocks, etc. How are you then thinking about positioning the portfolio for all of these developments?
Well, we're very much domestically oriented. Yeah. We've had some great success over decades with some retailers within Vietnam that have been growing and compounding their earnings they've got high returns on invested capital, north of 25% on average over the last 10 years. And yet today, they're cheap. 10 to 12 times PE on a forward basis.
Yeah.
And yet they've got north of 20% earnings per share growth. So these are names we like. There are compounding stocks, high quality earnings. So we're putting a large part of our conviction into those names. These are names we've known for a long time. They've done a great job of returning capital to investors, but there's a long growth still ahead. So that would be one part. We're also quite convicted on some of the high quality banks in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And again, they've got a long runway of growth. Keeping an eye on where interest rates are going and inflation, of course. But that's an interesting opportunity for us. We're probably underweight real estate. Neil, we're not trying to be an index hugger. We're led by conviction. We're a stock picker. And that's served us well over the long term. However, there will be periods when we underperform an index, and you've just got to be prepared to be resolute and resilient as a stock picker in those times. So we're looking at long-term, high-growth compound earnings, I would say largely from those domestic champions in Vietnam.
Okay, perfect. Craig, thank you firstly to taking the time. I know a lot of demands on your time on a sort of 20-year anniversary. It's great to have you back in front of the cameras. Congratulations again to not just you, but the entire team for the milestone achieved. And we look forward to revisiting you in a few months' time and to getting an update on the story.
Thank you very much, Neil.